has left me. She's taken the kids to live in England. When did you find this out? Today, on the visit. Well, I found out for definite today. She talked about it before. We both did. Remember last year when I told you she wasn't coming up because she was too sick? Well, she wasn't sick. She was just browned off with the surges and the British Army outside the camp and the screws on the visit, and all the messing about getting ready and the annoyance with the kids. And then, before we know it, the half hour would be up. It was time to start waiting for the next half hour the following week. Your man's tone was despondently even. He continued to stare at the ceiling. To make matters worse, he corrected himself, we didn't live in a Republican community. So she used to come up on her own in her brother's car. And you know the way all our people come up on the bus, and well, most of them do, and we get a bit of crack, and you know, it all helps. Sinead always felt like a wee bit of an outsider. You should have said, sure, I said to him, sure, there's plenty of our people to give a wee bit of support. She could have come up with, or she could go out with Clet and Anne-Marie and all that crowd, and why don't you arrange? Nah, mucker, it's too late, he interrupted me. And don't be annoying yourself, I suggested all that. I even got my sisters to take her out. No, that isn't it. She just never got married for this. She got married to be married. It's not her fault. It's a wonder she stuck it for so long. It's 3 years now. Our Sean's 5, and we married, she's nearly 4. Not much of a life for any of them, is it? He swung his legs down off the table and hunched forward in his chair. He stared blankly at the wall. I could see the tears swelling up and welling up in his eyes. I'm going to miss the kids, he declared eventually, sucking in his cheeks and blowing out a long, deep breath. That's why Sinead didn't go before this. She knew I loved the kids up on a visit. Maybe, I offered, maybe it's a phase she's going through. Once it's out of her system, she'll be all right. Nah, your man smiled wryly at me. This is no phase. This is for keeps. Sinead's a realist. I've another 9 years to do, you know. That's not much of a future. So we decided that we'd separate. You agreed? I exclaimed. Aye, he replied. Well, what do you expect me to do? I was a beaten docket. I had no choice, like. I'd still see the kids during the summer. They're going to come back to stay with her ma, and our ones will bring them up to see me. And they'll probably have wee English accents. Who'd have thought it would turn out like this? Poor Sinead, poor kids, poor me. He gave a false little smile and then stood up. It's a hard-out station. He smiled again, a wee sorry smile. Come on, let's go for a walk. It's no use the two of us going on a big D. I'll be all right. I'm glad to get talking to somebody about it. You're the first one. You're the first one I've talked to except for Sinead. That just shows the type of relationships we have in here. By the way, don't say anything to the other boys. I'll tell them tomorrow. We pulled the door of the hut behind us and walked out. It was a bright starlit night. We paused, we hesitated, we were unsure of ourselves. Are you sure she's going away? I asked. More for something to say than anything else. Her plane left Aldergrove 10 minutes ago, your man answered with a touch of impatience creeping into his voice. I'm sorry, I said. I didn't mean to annoy you asking stupid questions. It's okay. It's not your fault. It's nobody's fault. It's just the way the cookie crumbles, as my dad used to say. The only problem is, he started to walk. I fell in alongside him. The only problem is, old comrade, is that I love Sinead. And Sinead still loves me. He stopped in mid-stride, and for the first time he looked me in the eyes. You don't understand that, do you? I said nothing. Well, maybe you're right, he continued. I don't understand it either. But that's what I believe, and that's what I'm going to keep believing, he asserted with determination, until I'm able to come to terms with this mess. Then I'd probably be ready to believe something else. Okay, but not before that. Okay, I replied. We walked in silence. You know why I need to believe that? He asked after a short while. You know why? He continued without waiting for an answer. Because in this place, he waved his hand expansively at the maze of wire and lights and watchtowers which surrounded us. In this place, you need to believe in something. And right at this moment, I don't have a lot to believe in. But I believe Sinead loves me. He glared fiercely at me, tears of anger and frustration and little tears of love and solidarity. No one in Longkite saw us weeping that night as we journeyed slowly around the yard. Or if they did, we didn't notice them surroundings. We thought only, each in our separate ways, of Sinead and the two kids flying high over the Irish Sea. Your man never mentioned her to me again, not for about 2 years. And she never came back. So Sin and Scale. Sin Scale Bronach. But Sin Scale Granwar Sheelam, it was to Solagum. This next story might cheer you up. And Tag certainly will. I'm the calm before the storm here. So you probably, people of a certain age here will probably know the two men in this story. In fact, some of you might even be the two men in this story. So I've enough time done, haven't I? So the cube and wee root, this had applied to these two. They went to St. Aidan's Primary, a fine school which grounded them well in the 3 hours before turning them loose into the wider world of wage earning and fiscal challenges. Probably on account of being thrust together at birth, the cube and wee root were marred in each other's way of going. They never had a falling out. That's not to say they didn't have differences of opinion. They did, quite often, but any altercation between them rarely lasted more than a few minutes. And that was mainly down to wee root's easygoing, quick to make up disposition. The cube would be the first to acknowledge that. What are you having, wee root? The cube asked. A pint? Indeed, I will, said wee root. Billy the barman wiped the top of the bar counter and waited for the cube to give him his orders. One time he made the mistake of anticipating the cube's requirements. His offering of 2 pints of Guinness had been summarily dismissed with great scorn by the cube. It's nice to be asked, the cube had said, or to wait to be asked. Who ordered these pints, my good man? That's what you always drink, said Billy. The cube stared at him for a long moment. You should never anticipate the customer's wishes. I mean, if this was a barber, you wouldn't just hack away at the customer's hair, now would you? Or if this was a restaurant, you wouldn't just serve up the meal. No, my good man, you would wait to see what nature of haircut was required, or what the customer wanted to eat. In a good restaurant, you might give the customer a menu. You might even explain the culinary options, or the specials if there were specials. But here, he declared, warming to his theme, here you don't even give the customer his, or indeed her, own place. In this pub, the customer gets no respect. So much for the customer always being right. What do you mean? Wee Root interrupted him. What do you mean, her place? Who's her? Who's she? They were leaning against the bar. Wee Root was on the high stool. He'd been there most of the afternoon. Why are you staring at me like that? Billy the barman challenged the cube. I'm trying to get it through to you that you have to treat the customer with respect. Okay, so you don't want these 2 pints? I never said that. I said you should not anticipate the customer's wishes. So after that, Billy the barman always waited until he had a very precise instruction on how he should proceed. Billy was like that, contrary. But then Sullivan's Public House was like that as well. Its clientele seemed to like it that way, though they would never admit it, especially Wee Root and the cube. 2 pints of Guinness, please, Billy. Coming up, said Billy. Wee Root smiled at the cube. I got a few quid off the dole, he said. Enough to take us to the hurling final tomorrow. What do you reckon? Are you up for that? We've no tickets. Don't worry about that. We'll get the tickets in Dublin, and if we can't, we'll watch it in the pub. Are you up for that? He repeated. I'll treat you. Okie dokie. How did you get the money off the dole? They give me a grant to attend my uncle's funeral in Glasgow. The cube took a long sip of the pint that Billy the barman had set before him. Ah, Billy, he said, that's a great pint. Thanks, Billy replied. We aim to please. Wee Root put a £20 note on the counter. Get yourself a drink, Billy, he suggested magnanimously, and another pint for me and the cube. Will you have a second pint, cube? The cube drowned and downed his glass. As a wiser man than me said one time, in for the penny, in for a pound. I'm sorry about your uncle, Billy, the barman sympathised, wiping the top of the counter. Was he sick? Aye, said Wee Cube. He was very poorly. The cube waited until Billy the barman had returned out of earshot to his stand at the Guinness pumps. I didn't know you had a sick uncle in Glasgow. I didn't even know you had an uncle in Glasgow, he said quietly to Wee Root. When's the funeral? It was yesterday, Wee Root replied, opening the local paper at a page of death notices. That's how I got the grant. He tapped one of the notices with his finger before handing the newspaper to the cube. The cube read the items closely. Mickey McGee died at home after a short illness. And heaven now with Auntie Kay, deeply regretted by his loving nephew, Aloysius McGee, and the family circle in Belfast. He set the paper back on the bar counter, took another thoughtful sip of his pint, and then turned slowly to Wee Root. Auntie Kay? Uncle Mickey? Loving nephew Aloysius? Are you having me on? You weren't in Glasgow yesterday. You were here with me, except for the time you went out to the bookies. Keep your voice down. Are you telling me you put that death notice in the paper? That you made it up? What kind of a man are you? Wee Root looked at him for a long, slow minute. The type of man who's buying you your second pint. The kind of man who will bring you to the All-Ireland tomorrow. How much did you get? That's for me to know and for you to find out. I got enough for a return ticket on the boat to be at Uncle Mickey's funeral. You don't have an Uncle Mickey, the cube hissed at him. Do you want to put it in the paper? Is that what you want? I'm away off home, Wee Root retorted, and he snarled uncharacteristically at the cube, and pushing back the high stool, he stormed out of the door of Sullivan's. Billy the barman looked at the cube curiously as he set the 2 pints on the counter. Will he be back for this? Nah, the cube replied. I'll have it for him. Leave it there. He raised the glass slowly to his lips. He's upset about his uncle. The two of them were very close. I never heard him mention an uncle in Glasgow, Billy the barman replied. Aye, said the cube. His Uncle Mickey was in the Ra. He was on the run. But keep it to yourself. That's why we rarely mentioned him. God rest his soul, the poor man. He was one of the good guys. He raised his glass in salute. Here's to Uncle Mickey, one of Ireland's finest sons. God rest him, Billy the barman replied reverently. I'll not say a word. You tell wee Root his secret's safe with me. I know that, Billy. Uncle Mickey told wee Root one time that you're a sound man. He told me that. Well, said Billy, reddening with pride, I did my wee bit, but whatever you say nothing. Walls have ears. The cube reached across for wee Root's pint and sipped it slowly. Sláinte, he said, whatever you say nothing. Billy, the barman, his face was slightly red. He thought to himself, it's nice to be acknowledged, as he wiped the counter once again before moving off to serve another customer. Later on the way home, the cube called to wee Root's house. Wee Root was sitting in the living room. The cube saluted him cheerfully, anxious to make up for their slight misunderstanding. After all these years, he had learned from wee Root the value of reconciliation, particularly when a day out in Dublin for the All-Ireland hurling was at stake. It's bitter cold out there, he volunteered, sitting down beside wee Root. But it's cosy here. Aye, said wee Root. He was sitting in front of an electric fire. There's great heat from this yoke. Is it a new one? The cube asked, stretching his palms out towards the heat. Nah, it's my brother's. Mine's broke, so our Jimmy lent me his. I came round to see what time we're going to the final tomorrow. Oh, so now you're going to the final, eh? I never said I didn't want to go. Of course I want to go. Who wouldn't want to go to the hurling final? I thought we had no money and no tickets. Well, we let the tickets look after themselves. We have the Spondulix, so it's you and me for Dublin in the morning. An early rise, Macara, so be off with you. I'm for bed now, so I am. The cube stood up. Thanks, mate. It'll be a great game tomorrow. I fancy Cork. By the way, you'd need to turn that fire down. Them electric fires will run your bill through the ceiling. They're really expensive to run. Well, I fancy the cats. Wee Root smiled as he left the cube to the door. And don't worry about the running costs for the fire. I told you it's our Jimmy's. It's not mine. The cube turned to reply. Then he stopped himself and bade wee Root good night. I just realised that this gets very confusing between wee Root and the cube. See you tomorrow. Slánavik. Up the cats. They got to Dublin the next morning, and all of this next extract actually happened. No expense was spared. 2 premium seats in first class. There was a big hurling contingent on the train. Gaels from the Glens, tight wee hard hurlers from Dunloy, Cushendall and Locheel, Owl boys from the Ards Peninsula, from Portaferry and Ballygallat, as well as from Belfast, from the Falls, from Ardoyne and Hannistown. The cube fell in, him and wee Root, with Bungie and Big Bootsy, along with wee Bootsy, his father. The son was taller, though when they were younger this wasn't the case, and the father was Big Bootsy. But as the son outgrew him, they exchanged nicknames. Head the Ball, Stinking Head, Duxer, Dark Cloud, and nearly said that right. By the time I said he would stay on that train and their company forever. The hurling fraternity is like that. If you're in, then you're really in. Hurlers stick by each other. I would never go to Croke Park by car again, he declared. Yup, said the cube. I remember the time Dahia drove down for the football final. He had his wee dog with him. He was parking on a side street off Dorset Street, and a wee lad came up to him as he was getting out of the car. Mister, he said, do you want me to mend your car for a tenner? No, thank you, son. I'm going to leave my wee dog in the car. He'll bark his head off if anybody goes near it. Is that so? The wee buck asked. Can he put out a fire? By the time they got to Drogheda, all the talk was about tickets for wee Root and the cube. Everyone else had a ticket or a firm promise of one, but despite a few frenzied phone calls, By the time they reached the outskirts of Dublin, we Root and the Cube were still ticketless. Not that they were too worried. Root hadn't been in Dublin since Tipperary beat Antrim in the final. He reminded the company that the day Antrim beat Kilkenny in the semi-final in Casement Park, Jerry McEwen had dropped dead. It was a shock, we Root said. We Jerry McEwen worked the cloakroom in the Plaza Dance Hall, and he wouldn't give you your coat if you didn't have a ticket. He used to drive fellas mad. They'd be rushing to try to leave a girl home, and we Jerry would keep them waiting. Many a young woman was saved on account of his diligence. He had a lisp, and he would shout, "No ticket, no dote." And that's all he was ever called. No ticket, no dote. Anyway, and that's what he was called, by the way. Anyway, when we beat the Cats, he collapsed and died on us, onto the stand in Casement, despite Dr. Pierce Donnelly's valiant efforts to save him. The shock was too much. I remember that, Bungie recalled. Poor no ticket. And I remember during the final that Tip destroyed us. Nicky English was on fire that day. And Shawnee A climbed up on the top of the old Nolly stand with an anti-extradition banner to protest at the Free Staters sending the lads back to the north. And he had it upside down. And we were all shouting it up at him to turn it the right way up, and he thought we were cheering him on. I said, "Stinking head, that was Shawnee A for you. If it was raining soup, he'd be out with a fork." But not a bad lad for all that. A terrible hurler, though. His cousin Jerry Misha, was a lovely hurler. So was Jerry's older brother, Paddy Paddy was small, he had a low centre of gravity. He could turn on a sixpence. Great stick work too. A mighty man for pulling on the slither on the ground. They all agreed that ground hurling was a neglected skill. Soon the train pulled into Connolly Station. Wee Root was glad to be back in the capital where all these adventures had happened. He and the Cube parted company with the rest of them at Summerhill. The Cube had arranged to see his cousin in a pub on a chance that the cousin might have tickets. He didn't, or at least he only had one, and that was his own. But they had a pint together anyway and caught up on all the family news. Then, as the cousin, Brendy O'Hara, was leaving, he caught sight of a man rushing through the public bar. "Hi, Sammy," Brendy called after him. Sammy turned, and seeing Brendy, he smiled broadly. "Me old Segotia. What's the story, Brendy?" "Any tickets, Sammy?" "This is me cousin from Belfast and his mate. They're stuck for a ticket." Sammy eyed Wee Root in the Cube as he and Brendy embraced. "From Belfast? I'd love to help you lads. I was to see two lads here to get them into the Hogan stand. But I'm late, they must have left. That's why I'm rushing." "Russian? I thought you were Irish." "A dub," Wee Root joked. "Do you want a pint, comrade?" Sammy smiled at him. "A comedian," he smirked. "Don't heed him," the Cube intervened hurriedly. "He's only joking." "So am I," said Sammy. "That's a good one. I'll have a double vodka and Coke, comrade." "What's a vodka?" Wee Root whispered to the Cube. "A vodka is Russian for vodka." I thought he was a dub. Why is he talking Russian? Brendy intervened before the conversation became too complicated. "The two boys you were to meet," he asked Sammy, "you said you'd get them into Croker, into the Hogan stand. Could you take our Cube and Wee Root instead?" "It wouldn't work with them. Their accents is all wrong, and it'll cost 40 quid. "I'll give you 50, said Wee Root. "Well," Sammy hesitated, "but you've got to keep your mouths shut. Let me do all the talking." Wee Root and the Cube nodded their assent. "You can trust these two," Brendy vouched. "Ballymurphy men, used to keeping their mouths shut." Wee Root sealed the deal by handing Sammy 50 quid. Sammy finished his vodka and signalled for them to follow him. Once outside, he handed Wee Root and the Cube 2 Stewart's bibs. He donned one himself. "So just follow me and not a word out of your mouths." The Cube bade his cousin farewell. "Thanks, our kid." Wee Root gave them a thumbs up, and together they fell in behind Sammy, who was making his way authoritatively through the crowd which thronged around Croke Park. The rest was easy. Sammy ushered them through various gates. Soon, to the Cube's delight, he was positioned close to the Ardcolia box in the Hogan stand. Wee Root wasn't too far away. The two very best seats in the place. And the game was at Humdinger, an epic display of hurling with the Cats triumphing in the end. That night in Sullivan's, Billy the barman greeted the two returning heroes with 2 pints and 2 glasses of Bushmills. For once the Cube didn't upbraid him for not waiting for their order. The truth was that Billy's warm welcome touched them both. It was a perfect end, well, nearly the end, to a perfect day. We Root and the Cube were in great form by this stage anyway. They climbed back on the high stools as Billy poured himself a large Jameson number 10. When he had done that, he snapped to attention behind the bar. Here's to Uncle Mickey. He raised his glass in salute, a true patriot. The Cube and Root stood erect and raised their pints in unison. To Uncle Mickey, they chorused, and to Billy, a sound man, as Uncle Mickey put it. Billy the barman smiled proudly. The Cube clinked their glasses together with a flourish. Root joined them. What a great day we had. Sláinte, they said. Sinné, Gurmagov.
Okay, thank you, Gurmagov. Are you ready, sir? Well, what's there to say about Tag Hickey? Tag is creative director of the critically acclaimed comedy troupe CC Cahoons, and he wrote, directed and starred in the RT sitcom The School. His satiric Brexit video, Loyalism but in a House in Cork, clocked up more than 1 million views online, and he is currently working on Brexit the musical. Since the end of February, he's had more than 8 million views of his videos on Twitter and close to 100 million impressions, and he's had endorsements from some of the biggest names in world comedy, such as Armanda Iannucci, as well as international academic experts on colonialism, including India's Shasha Tharoor. His satires take on racism, sexism and homophobia in Ireland, 32 counties, Israel's treatment of the Palestinians, US imperialism and its war on terror, and a range of histories and other videos. Tag will talk about his life, his role of a comedian in society, and the creative impulse behind his satiric writing. And he's also not a bad singer. Tag Hickey.
Hi guys, how's it going? I don't have many jokes, I'm just kind of chatting about my life, so hopefully I'm not a letdown. The jury was clearly funnier than me as well, so. Look, I'm just delighted, I suppose, and saddened to say that I've never got a reception like I have in the last couple of days in Cork. I won't even try to hide what an honour it is for me to be here at this event in this city, sharing a stage with heroes of mine. What I would say though, and I don't want to start off arrogantly, but in comedy terms, because I'm on last, I'm going to tell everyone that I was the headliner and that Jerry Adams was one of my support acts. He did really well, and I think we can expect to see a lot more from him. Because I have a chaotic, rambling mind, I'm going to try and put a bit of structure on my remarks. So I'm going to talk to you about 3 things. My politics, briefly, a bit of a defence of sobriety, a few ex-drinkers here, that should be all right. It's perhaps an un-Irish thing to do, but I'm going to talk about sobriety. And finally, my writing. So I'll kick off on number 1. In recent months, I have been outed by some Twitter-based detectives as a shinner. It was perhaps not quite the gotcha they believed it to be. For as a good friend of mine recently told me, when he first met me, I told him I was an Irish Republican before I told him my name. It's important to me to be authentic and real and say who I am and what I'm about, and I'll explain why in a minute. I'm passionate, but not partisan, I believe. I reckon if you're authentic, most people will respect and appreciate that even if they don't like your politics. You might be surprised to learn that my Twitter followers include Fine Gael's Regina Doherty and Neil Richmond. Overestimate the importance of a cheeky Republican working class Cork comedian having a bit of good-natured banter with a Dublin Fine Gael TD on the internet, but in the spirit of a shared Ireland, I actually do think it's quite symbolic. I'd probably have a lot more in common with a working class lad on the Shankill than I would with Neil. So if the two of us can get it together, I think anyone can. So although I'm apparently now a Shinnerbot, I wasn't steeped in republicanism or nationalism like I'm sure some of you guys here were. I grew up in an average working class family in Cork where republicanism wasn't really mentioned. We were already a republic of Ireland, George Hamilton called us. And we went to Germany with water balloons and custard pies. The Nordy Republicans, on the other hand, were bad, and they needed to just make friends with the orange chaps and let us get on with building Ireland into the corporatist Celtic tiger who was apparently ravenously eating up all the competition but would before long devour himself. Everything changed for me when I saw this man on The Late Late Show in 1994. The producers put him in the bowl corner without so much as a handshake from our cherished host, Gay Byrne, and pitted him against a panel of histrionic, apparently morally superior Free Staters. Jerry calmly unravelled their hypocrisy and ignorance, and on the spot won this impressionable Cork lad's admiration. I probably immediately became a Republican, but much more importantly, I just became aware of the North and got some small sense of its complexities. I just became interested and engaged. I began to question this weird Southern moral superiority. I just didn't believe that people in the North from either community were going to reach out to Northern nationalists. When are they going to acknowledge the callous abandonment of their own people by successive governments to a state that for generations denied them every human right up to and including life? I don't think I've ever heard someone in the Southern establishment mention this unconscionable wrong. We're all quick to point out what Indian academic Shashi Tharoor calls British historical amnesia. Well, it seems to me to be an Irish problem as well. Anyway, I think things are changing, but that change is slow. To this day, I have many friends in the South who've travelled all over the world, but who've never crossed the border into the 6 counties. I'm definitely going to steer away from politics very soon, but there might be a border poll here in the not too distant future. We might all be getting back together. Shouldn't we maybe visit each other before we do? Get to know each other kind of thing? I wouldn't hold your breath though, because 83% of Dubs say they've no business or desire to ever visit Cork. Now, to be fair, that stat is made up and is just pure malicious propaganda on my part. I suppose as I got older and into college, I became interested in what was going on in the world beyond Ireland. What else lay behind the official histories and media coverage? Did the British really civilise the world? Is America really the long-suffering, underappreciated global liberator and peacekeeper? Were the Palestinians really all terrorists, trying to demolish the one good and decent democracy in the unstable Middle East? I enjoyed researching these things and became a bit of a lefty, I suppose, but I didn't really go on many marches or pickets. I became a sofa socialist, and the sofa would often be beer-stained, which brings me to my second point, the demon drink. We're motoring now, guys, we're going to get through this. One of the many horrendous things about alcoholism, or at least how it manifests for me, is the fact that it keeps you on the sidelines of your own life. I wanted to be an activist. I wanted to write shows and perform them. I wanted to be a reliable father and family member, friend. I wanted to do lots of things. But I wanted to be drunk more. I didn't drink every day. I was a binge drinker. I'd go on sporadic binges, maybe on average once a month, and yet the substance still ruled my life. When I was about to go back on it, I couldn't do anything with the excitement. I'd lie awake at night, dreaming about the whoosh of the doors of the early house behind me, getting my hands on the first pint of Beamish put in front of me, getting back into the crack and banter with the other hard drinkers and likely lads and lassies who were sure to have missed me desperately. Spoiler, they usually hadn't noticed I'd been away. And when the session ended after 3 or 4 days, my phone became my sworn enemy. Ex-partners and bosses and concerned family members leaving texts and voicemails wondering if I were dead or alive. And I'd deal with these as pathetically as I could, and then the next debilitating revolution of the drinker's merry-go-round would begin. Depressive remorse. I'd take to what a friend of mine in recovery describes as the torture chamber, my bedroom. Blinds pulled, anxiety, medication procured, block out the world until the head and the fog would slowly begin to lift again. And then the promises would recommence. Never again, never again. But then the inevitable day would arrive when I'd be feeling good, and I'd think to myself, was I that bad? Do you know? Would I not just have 2 or 3 pints and go home and go to work in the morning? And I'd have that honest intention. I mean, I wasn't a psychopath or an idiot who would plan to go drinking for days on end, end up in places where you could easily get yourself killed, and then retire to the bedroom of a dingy gaff somewhere to settle in for a week of suicidal depression and anxiety. It's the curious cognitive dissonance of every alcoholic I know that in spite of the overwhelming evidence to the contrary, we always feel, but this is the time. This time I've cracked it. This time it'll be different. But after 2 or 3 pints, I'd have the lip. And when you have the lip, a Copernican revolution takes place. You're no longer drinking the drink is now drinking you. And it'll let you know when and if it's done trying to drown you. Absolutely nothing, and I mean nothing on earth, could stop me when I'd started. And so the whole vicious cycle would perpetuate. Bit of work here and there. I had some great opportunities at RT when I was just out of college. Bit of parenting, bit of family commitments. But that's the thing. Everything was bit part. These other things were sideshows. Drink was the main event. And I started to seriously worry how the show was going to end. And then there's the lying. Sorry now guys, I know this is very dark, but we're getting towards the end of the dark part. Alkies have to lie to survive. It's not alcoholism, actually, it's an upset tummy. It's stress from the work that I'm not doing. It's anything but the great love of my life that you cannot question or even try to take from me, or I will fall right here, right now in front of you. But the lying eats away at you. You lie to yourself more than anyone else. You can't believe a word that's coming out of your own mouth. Your inauthenticity begins to become untenable. You're banging on about some social cause or other to your mates, and you can see in their eyes, this guy's a bullshitter. This guy talks the talk, but he's not the real deal. We can readily dismiss what he's saying. To thine own self be true, Hamlet's Polonius warned. What's the point in being alive if your life is just a painful and unending lie? So in the summer 2015, I felt like I was in a computer game where the final bar of my last life was flashing. I sought help, and thank God I got it. I completely threw the towel in and cut the shit. Up until then, I had an answer for everything, but a solution to nothing. I took responsibility for my actions and stopped blaming others. I started meditation. I started knocking around with other drunks who wanted to change and live happy, fulfilling lives, not just put down the drink and angrily white-knuckle their way through the rest of their remaining years. I slowly started to rebuild my life. I survived and then I thrived. And I made a commitment to myself in those early years of sobriety, seeing as lying almost killed me, I must never, at least intentionally, be inauthentic again. Which briefly brings us back to point 1, and why I've no problem telling people who I am and what I'm about. Who knows, I might help someone that way. I don't think I ever helped anyone when I was bullshitting. And in terms of activism, I can now go on the marches. I can now write the sketches that will hopefully provoke a reaction to maybe get people to read up about the issues I'm passionate about and maybe add their voice to the discussion. In short, I'm off the sidelines, I'm togged off, and I'm playing. And you know what? I'm enjoying it. So I'd like to praise sobriety. It's not very cool or Irish. I think I'm going against the great Irish tradition of the brilliant but tortured, drunken artists, the Brendan Behan's, James Joyce's. But I reckon they created incredible work in spite of, not because of, their alcoholism. Well, look, I'll speak for myself. I never did much of value in my drinking. I'd have great ideas, sure, but I'm yet to meet the man or woman who doesn't have good ideas sitting on a bar stool. But none of them reach fruition. In sobriety, I started to finish. Good, bad, or indifferent sketches, plays, songs, TV scripts were suddenly reaching an end point and being submitted. A bit like my personal life. It seemed my bit part days were over. But this isn't a drink bashing, or at least I hope it's not coming across that way. Many, many people, even Irish people, can drink away and it doesn't change them, or inhibit their ability to be productive, well-adjusted human beings. I still love being in pubs and generally greatly enjoy the company of drinkers. I don't believe inanimate substances can be evil. I just know that me and drink combined equal trouble. And all I'm saying is, if you're a guy or a girl and you think you might be in the same boat and you're worried your life will be over if you stop drinking, here's some good news told by Tig. Your life is only beginning. Now though, when you finally stop and you fancy yourself as a creative person, there's a new fear in town. What if you're shit? Because for years in pubs and parties, I'd be telling my yarns, trying to be the funniest guy at the session, telling everyone if it wasn't for drinking, I'd be on the stage selling out venues. But what happens when the excuse of alcoholism is gone? Well, the only way around that fear was to plough straight through it and be shit. Like, just be awful. Just get the thing done. Get to the next draft or show or sketch where it'll probably be a bit better. A lot of the stuff I write is pure rubbish, but I write something every day. When I was drinking, I had a serious disadvantage, but now sobriety, I think, gives me an edge, a hunger. I've the drive of a guy who's just woken up and can't believe all the time he's wasted asleep in bed. I could have, maybe should have been dead, so with the second chance at life, by God, I'm going to grab it. And you won't match me for hard work. You can't, I'm a madman. I believe that my limited talent, added to loads of grind, is enough to produce strong work that'll be widely seen, help people, or at least give them a lift in these extraordinarily difficult times. And thankfully, that's what seems to be happening. So we finally get to point 3, the actual writing. Fuck, like, your man from Cork is asked up to talk about writing and he just goes on about drinking republicanism for an hour. Like. But just to say as well, if you're flagging, that we're only minutes away from a song. It's an old theatre trick, actually. You can basically do what you want for the majority of the show, like any old rubbish, but hit him with a big song or a dance at the end, have him bopping, leaving the place, and then they go out thinking they're after having a great night. But it is some buzz for me to be asked to participate in a writing event. It really is, because without cracking out the violins, I'm not sure many people think of comedians as proper writers of artistic merit. There's no comedy box to tick in Arts Council applications down south, for instance. I normally pretend I'm doing a theatre piece to just try and get a few quid out of them and then horrify them when they come and see that it's mostly jokes. In 2017, I wrote a sitcom for RTE called The School. I also played the lead role, directed it and produced it somehow. I don't know how that happened. Well, actually I suppose I do. A Belfast man made it happen. Eddie Doyle was head of comedy at the time and took a shine to me, but he was up against it with the powers that be. I was steered towards making a family comedy, which at one stage it was going to air at 6:30 on RT1, but it ended up going out at 11 p.m. on RT2. They cancelled it after 3 episodes because I don't know what it's like here, but down south, a lot of families are in bed by 11 p.m. on a weeknight. We had great reviews and lots of interest from overseas in a second season, but RT literally stopped answering my emails after Eddie left for BBC. RT are a disaster, but that's not why I'm telling you the seemingly tale of woe. I'm telling you because I learned 2 important writing lessons from my vain attempts running around Dublin and London, desperately trying to force a second season off the ground. 1, I'd little or no leverage, and you need leverage. And 2, I'd played the game with the national broadcaster, took the edge off my scripts, created a compromise project with one eye on commercial success, and yet it wasn't commercially successful. Point 1, I thought to myself, if I'm ever in the room with a commissioner again, I'll have a decent body of work and hopefully a little fan base behind me, which will make it much harder for them to ignore my emails and my creative wishes. And point 2, I'm never compromising again. The authenticity needed to go up a gear. I decided to just write exactly what I wanted to, but to work that bit harder at it, to try to control the controllables. So the first thing I wrote after I licked my RT wounds was a surreal dark comedy about my drinking called In One Eye, Out the Other. It was part theatre, part stand-up comedy, I suppose. I like to pretentiously call it stand-up tragedy. A prominent comedy club owner told me, you'll never get an hour out of that. And I thought, we'll see. Because guys, if you haven't noticed by now, I'll just come out and tell you, I'm an advocate of the philosophy, when all else fails to motivate you, use spite. I don't know if you've seen the Netflix documentary The Last Dance about basketball legend Michael Jordan, but the man's career was effectively fueled by people telling him he couldn't do stuff and him proving them wrong. When they stopped doubting him, he just started making stuff up. Well, my housemate's nickname for me is Jordan. The only way he can get me to do a bit of housework is if he starts his petition with, I bet you couldn't. And that's it. I'm up off the couch like a domesticated mad dog, juggling brooms and hoovers and magic mops in a mad flurry of spite. To go back to Father Ted for a second, my dream is to one day do a Father Ted Golden Cleric style speech on a podium on Patrick Street in Cork, cataloguing all the people who wronged me over the years. And now we get to liars. Well, anyway, I got an hour out of that show, and it went on to have several sellout runs in Dublin, picked up a string of great reviews, and is currently being watched by international producers at Edinburgh Fringe. I'm not telling you this to try and make myself seem to be great or whatever. Not at all. I'm far from great. I'm really just getting going. The point is that the show that I wrote is literally the weirdest, maddest, most offbeat thing I've ever written in my life, and yet it's probably the most successful. Why? I just would speculate, because it's authentic. It's me laying myself bare. Audiences and readers know when you're being real, I think, and they love it, maybe because it allows them to be real as well. As Danny said, I'm writing a follow-up one-man show which couldn't be any more different. It's got a working title of Brexit, but it's a house share in Cork, the one-man musical. It's effectively an hour-length version of the Loyalism sketch with music. I have a little team around me already, and I'm now just figuring out how or if I can play all the characters simultaneously. Obviously, all Cork accents again. In terms of the storyline, all I'll tell you for now is that there's an EastEnders-like love triangle between England, Europe, and Scotland, and a shocking but tear-jerking reconciliation between Ireland and Loyalism. I'm going to launch the show up north. That's a promise. I'm a very loyal sort of guy. I guess you could call me a loyalist. And I want to give a nod to the people and the places that looked after me. People in this city and the 6 counties generally have been sharing my nonsense, promoting me and buying tickets to my shows long before Mark Carruthers and The View were logging complaints about me. I suppose most of you, if you know my writing at all, would probably know it through recent viral sketches, which I'll touch on now before singing myself out. Late February, I uploaded a sketch called Loyalism, but it's a house share in Cork. I had a voiceover gig the same day, so I literally uploaded the sketch and went into a booth for a couple of hours and forgot about it. At that point in my sketch comedy career, if I checked on a sketch after 2 or 3 hours, I'd be extremely happy with a few thousand views and hopefully a few new followers. After the voiceover gig, I got home, threw on a bit of lunch, checked the phone to see the sketch had 200,000 views and I had about 2,000 new followers. I genuinely turned the phone off and on again. Because I just assumed that there was something wrong with the Samsung. That night, the sketch was on BBC, would go on to have well over 2 million views, get me 10,000 new followers, and earn me my very first death threats. I would assume not the last. To go back to writing, in the days afterwards there was much outrage online, but I was cool as a breeze about it because I knew I'd done the research and put in the hard yards on the script. I must have redrafted that about 8 or 9 times. That's maybe excessive for a 2-minute sketch, but I wanted to make sure that I was satirising the absurdist position loyalism finds itself in post-Brexit and not just simply having a pop-off loyalism. I think there's a subtle but important difference, and I humbly think that I got the balance right. But then again, I probably would say that, wouldn't I? I think actually my loyalism character was the most likeable in that house. But repeating the trick is maybe even harder, and of course you feel a degree of pressure when you get ridiculous numbers like that, which I'd never got before in my life. But when all else fails, forget about potential reactions and go back to researching and writing the things that you're interested in. That seems to work for me anyway. I'm certainly not an academic historian or geopolitician, but again, I have a passionate interest there, so I read away and watch docs until someone puts me to bed. Put that together with a knack for making dark or unsettling things funny, and you've got something to work with. So a follow-up sketch about the British Empire was written over a week, but researched over about 20 years. It got over 1 million views and an endorsement from Shashi Tharoor, the Indian academic. I'd been reading him and watching his lecture since college, so it's still absolutely mental to me that a clip of me chatting to myself in my kitchen wearing a variety of my housemates' shirts caught his eye. I was on a bit of a roll now, and I thought to myself, I wonder if I can exploit the 15 minutes of fame and do a bit of good with all the attention. Because even when I was the drunken sofa socialist, the plight of the Palestinian people was one that really got me. I always wanted to do something more than just pontificate to my disinterested mates in the pub. I felt now I finally had my chance. I spent weeks reading about the occupation and again redrafted the script several times with the help of a Palestinian journalist friend. When we were happy, I shot it and edited it in a day and uploaded it to Twitter the following morning. Attached to the tweet was a link to a GoFundMe fundraiser for the Aida refugee camp, whom I'd been in touch with over the previous months. The target was 10 grand, and if we'd have gotten that in the middle of a pandemic, I would have been absolutely delighted. It got to €33,000 in less than a week. Again, I hope this doesn't come across like I'm looking for praise. I'm telling you because I reckon the hard work on the script was the key to the sketch and then this fundraiser doing well. That and Irish people's extraordinary generosity. In the apartment in Cork, I don't have much. I have a decent camera and basic editing skills, but I'm not going to give the top production companies in the country anything to worry about. Sometimes I'm lucky enough to have my great buddy, colleague, and long-suffering housemate I've been telling you about, Dominic McHale, shooting them for me. Right, Dominic, if you're watching. Sometimes I have my brilliant teenage daughter behind the camera, and sometimes I'm on my own. Regardless, there are very obvious limits to the standard of production value that I can get to. But what I do have, though, is my scripts and my ideas. And if you think about it, there's no limits there, except for the ones I put on myself, and that really excites me. I was at a screenwriting festival recently, and there was an awful lot of doom and gloom at one of the workshops about the lack of support and opportunities for us here. And of course, they're quite correct. There is a dearth of safeguards. But I try to look at the bright side. If you think about it, we scriptwriters hold all the cards. There's no meetings in Netflix, or dare I say it, RTE, without the screenwriters' scripts and ideas. Writers generally are the ones who make things happen. There's no books, there's no plays, there's no sketches or shows without us. We was in a band and we used to gig here. And one time I went missing here actually, in a drink-fueled blackout for a day or so. I don't know what I was up to. I hope I had a good time anyway, and I'd say I probably did. I've been threatening my Cork crew online with just moving up here, altogether. And I'd be sorely tempted. A Cork lad on Twitter recently described me as an embarrassment to the city. I love that. That's going on a poster. It's my undying ambition to embarrass many more in Cork, throughout the country and far beyond. Thank you for listening to me. The city and the festival has a friend for life in me anyway. And when I get home, I'll tell my friends one more time, it's actually quite nice, you know. Maybe you should visit. Gurav Magat. So I was thinking about what to sing, and there's a Luke Kelly song that I love. It's a love song. There's like a nice little theme of love in the story, and it's a love song. It's not one of Luke's massive tunes maybe, but I think it's very beautiful. I think, I could be open to correction here, it's the last song that he sang in a live performance before he passed away. So I hope you like it. It's called a Night Visiting Song. I normally have guitars, else you'll just have to imagine a guitar. I must away now, I can no longer tarry. This morning's tempest I have to cross. I must be guided without a stumble into the arms I love the most. And when he came to his true love's well up and her down soft pill,